What's going on, guys, and welcome back to another Walking Dead video. And finally, we are here with part 2 of What If CHRISTA Came Back. We last left off at the events of episode 4. Let us continue this story. CHRISTA volunteers to stay with the rest of the group, while Clementine heads off with Jane to look for Sarah, Luke, and/or Nick. This scenario would play out the same way it would in canon, based on your original decisions regarding Sarah's fate. The story takes a different turn when Kenny starts helping Rebecca manage the birth of her baby after they find out her water broke. Kenny would then tell Clementine to check on Mike and Bonnie at the museum. He also tells CHRISTA she should go with her to watch her back just in case. When Clementine and CHRISTA arrive at the museum, they help Mike and Bonnie look around for anything useful. CHRISTA would then talk about how excited Omid would be if he ever stepped foot in this museum. Clementine can respond saying something similar about Lee, given that they both liked Civil War history. Eventually, the group would check the small booth where they try to get the water. Bonnie could try to open the door herself, which would then trigger the walker to grab her. Clementine can decide to go through the gap to get to the door, which would lead to the walker grabbing her instead. Mike kicks down the door and CHRISTA kills the walker with her knife. After this close call, CHRISTA becomes irate with Bonnie for having Clementine risk her life like that, telling her that Clem isn't expendable. Later on, the group makes their way back to the meetup spot, where they would be met with a herd of walkers approaching them. Once the group makes it to the observation deck, CHRISTA calls Sarah over to stay by Rebecca's side with Kenny. This would prevent Sarah's alternate death from occurring later on. The group needs more help keeping the herd back. CHRISTA finds Arvo's gun on the floor and uses it to shoot the walkers. Eventually, the observation deck fully collapses, the group is safe from the herd, and Rebecca gives birth to AJ. When Jane tries to leave while speaking to Clementine, CHRISTA would jump in the conversation, telling Jane that it's better that she stays with the group since they've made it this far. Given the fact that Sarah wasn't killed in this scenario, Jane doesn't gain any more motivation to leave the group, so she decides to stay. We now reach a critical decision in the game. Kenny wishes to leave first thing in the morning to get to someplace better, but Luke wants Rebecca to get more rest. CHRISTA decides to side with Luke as she does deeply care for Rebecca and her baby. As Clementine, if you choose to side with Kenny, CHRISTA will grow frustrated with you. If you side with Luke, CHRISTA will thank Clementine for thinking about Rebecca first. Fast forwarding to the end of the episode, the group would encounter Arvo and the other Russian bandits. Right before chaos ensues, Rebecca would succumb to her weak state while holding AJ and immediately turn. Before she can do any harm to the baby, CHRISTA takes her gun and shoots her, which causes the shootout to start at the end of the episode. Finally, in episode 5, many of the Russian bandits, including Arvo's sister, have already been dealt with, given that the group outnumbered them. However, one of them is still standing, and notices AJ on the ground. He aims his gun at him. If you don't react fast enough, Kenny takes the opportunity to shoot him in his head, ending the fight. CHRISTA picks AJ up, relieved but distraught that he had to experience that. She looks down at Rebecca's corpse, and vows with the rest of the group to protect her child. Kenny would grab Arvo with the intention of taking his life, but the group stops him. Although Arvo is spared due to having info on the food, CHRISTA tells him not to count himself so lucky after they make it to the house. The group would press on and eventually make it to the power plant. Most of the scenario would play out similar to canon, except with Kenny having his heart-to-heart conversation with CHRISTA as well as Clementine. Eventually, the group has to cross the frozen river. CHRISTA decides to carry AJ the entire way and chooses to go with Kenny and Arvo. Sarah is frantic to walk on the ice, as she isn't confident she'll last on the frozen river. Suddenly, Arvo starts running from the group, but is still caught by Kenny since he falls partially in. Sarah, however, decides not to move and tells everyone to leave her. The group notices the walkers approaching the river. Luke tries to act fast to help Sarah, but unfortunately, the ice would collapse under both of them, causing them to fall through. You can choose to jump in and help them, however, Luke will die as he forces Sarah back up away from the walker underwater, which would eventually pull him down. Luke will die regardless of your choices. The group gets settled into the house to start a fire. Kenny is furious with Arvo, but CHRISTA tells Kenny to calm down, and that there'll be time for that later. We'll skip to when Kenny gets the truck working. CHRISTA agrees with Kenny that the best chance of helping AJ is heading north towards Wellington. This causes a huge divide in the group. We now make it to the scene where Bonnie and Mike are working with Arvo to leave the rest of the group. If Sarah survived, she decides to tag along with them. Clementine has her gun drawn on Mike. When they try to reason with Clementine, Mike approaches her to get the gun out of her hand. Arvo still shoots Clementine in the shoulder, but right before he runs away, a bullet would hit him right in the head. That shot would come from CHRISTA, who overheard their conversation earlier. Mike, Bonnie, and/or Sarah would run away from the house, while CHRISTA would tend to Clementine. Fast forwarding, Clem would wake up to see Kenny, CHRISTA, and Jane driving on the road like in canon. Jane and Kenny would still argue, and CHRISTA would try to reason with both of them. Kenny, along with CHRISTA, would get out to find some gas for the car, but then the walkers appear, which eventually leads to Clem and Jane getting separated after the car crash. Clem eventually meets Kenny and CHRISTA at the park, with Jane to return later without AJ. Kenny starts fighting Jane like in the original story, but CHRISTA tries to hold him back. Fueled by his anger, CHRISTA and Clem aren't enough to hold Kenny. The climactic decision arrives. If you choose to let Kenny kill Jane, CHRISTA will be torn, but understand later after they discover that AJ was alive the whole time. They would then make it to Wellington, where they'd beg Edith to take Clem and AJ in. If you decide to stay in Wellington, CHRISTA as well as Kenny will hug Clementine and say their goodbyes. CHRISTA and Kenny would walk away with the supplies they were given. If you choose to stay with them, they'll all leave Wellington together, just like the canon ending. Now, if you chose to shoot Kenny, CHRISTA will be upset, and her and Clem will mourn his loss. Once they discover Jane was simply hiding AJ, CHRISTA becomes furious with Jane, since she used AJ as leverage over Kenny. CHRISTA draws her gun on Jane. Broken over the loss of her friend, she turns to Clementine and asks her what she should do. If you say they should leave her, CHRISTA will reluctantly lower her gun, telling Jane she never wants to see her again. If you tell her to shoot Jane, without hesitation, CHRISTA shoots Jane right in the chest so she can endure what Kenny had to experience. Clementine and CHRISTA would press on. Instead of walking to Wellington, CHRISTA votes they walk back to Howe's as she feels they have a better chance of getting AJ there. They make it to Howe's, where they find the formula and later encounter the random family. CHRISTA isn't enthusiastic about dealing with new people, so she decides to turn them away. You can try to fight her on this choice, but her decision is final. CHRISTA tells Clementine that she's glad that they have made it this far together after everything they've experienced. She looks at AJ, saying she never thought she'd get a second chance. And that, guys, is part 2 of What If CHRISTA Came Back in Season 2. Now, if you guys want me to continue this series, please drop a like and subscribe, and please drop a comment if you're really enthusiastic about this particular scenario. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for recommending these and giving these videos so much attention. I really do appreciate it. I will see all of you next time. 2 cents. Out.